What would you do if you found the love of your life living on the streets? This millionaire fell for a homeless woman, and when she got pregnant, society mercilessly mocked him. How could someone of his standing sink so low? Everyone said. But 5 years later, something incredible happened that left everyone speechless. Where are you watching this video from? Let me know in the comments. If you want to discover what happened to this couple who defied society, hit like right now and subscribe to the channel. I assure you, the end of this story will leave you speechless. The morning light filtered through the imposing skyscrapers of Manhattan, casting long shadows over Fifth Avenue. Ethan Reed, in his custom Italian suit, observed the city from his 42nd floor office window. At 30, he was the CEO of Reed Innovations, a firm that had tenfold its value under his direction. Forbes magazine had just listed him among America's most influential entrepreneurs. "Mr. Reed, your meeting with the Japanese investors starts in 5 minutes, announced Chloe, his assistant, through the intercom. "Thanks, Chloe, I'll be right there." He responded without taking his eyes off the urban horizon. His fingers drummed on the marble surface of his desk. There was something he couldn't quite decipher, an inexplicable emptiness amidst so much success. His thoughts were interrupted when he grabbed his briefcase and headed to the boardroom. The meeting flowed like a choreographed dance. Ethan knew every step, every turn, every moment to smile or appear serious. At the end, the Japanese signed a $200 million deal. Any other executive would have celebrated, but Ethan barely managed a professional smile. "You should be toasting, not hiding in your office," commented Marcus, his best friend and CFO, walking in without knocking. "You just closed the biggest deal of the year. We'll celebrate tonight," Ethan replied, without looking up from his computer. "Are you okay? You seem distant lately." "I'm perfectly fine." He cut the conversation short. "I just need to finish some outstanding tasks." That night, after a formal dinner with the investors, Ethan decided to walk home instead of taking his usual chauffeured car. He needed air, space, freedom from the suit that sometimes felt like a gilded cage. A soft rain began to fall over the city. Ethan stopped under an awning, watching the drops form small streams on the streets. That's when he saw her, a young woman sitting in the doorway of an abandoned building, trying to shield a small bundle in her arms. Her face, though marked by the harshness of life on the streets, retained an undeniable beauty. Her eyes, a bright emerald green, contrasted with the darkness of the night. Something in that gaze compelled him to approach. It wasn't pity, but an inexplicable connection, as if something invisible was pulling him. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" he asked, surprising himself. The woman looked up, distrustfully. "I don't need charity," she replied, with a dignity that disconcerted Ethan. "It's not charity. I just wanted to offer you a place." He bent down to spend the night. He took off his jacket and held it out to her. She hesitated for a moment, studying his face as if searching for some hidden motive. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, she accepted the garment. "My name is Layla," she said in a soft but firm voice. "Ethan," he replied, feeling something within his perfectly ordered world begin to waver. What Ethan couldn't imagine was that this simple gesture, on that rainy night, would change his life forever. Neither the millions in his bank account nor his business empire had prepared him for what would happen from that moment on. And as Layla adjusted the small notebook she protected in her arms, not a baby, as he had initially thought, but her writings, destiny began to weave its intricate web around them both. 3 weeks had passed since that encounter in the rain. Ethan found himself distracted during an important corporate presentation, his mind drifting to those green eyes he hadn't been able to forget. "Ethan, do you have any comments on the financial projection?" asked David, one of the board members, impatiently. "Of course," he responded, quickly regaining his composure. Please continue. That afternoon, after finishing his commitments, Ethan returned to the same doorway where he had met Layla. To his surprise, he found her there, this time reading under the dim light of a street lamp. He approached cautiously, like someone afraid of scaring a wild animal. "Hi," he said simply, extending a hot coffee he had bought on the way. Layla looked up, a mix of surprise and suspicion in her eyes. "You came? To get your very expensive jacket back?" she asked with a smile that tried to hide vulnerability. "I came to see how you are," he replied, with a sincerity that surprised even himself. They began to talk. Hours passed as Layla told him snippets of her story. She had been a literature professor in Boston, with a promising future, until a series of circumstances led her to lose everything. "I wasn't always this," she said, gesturing to herself. "I had a life, a career. I wrote." "What happened?" Ethan asked, genuinely interested. Layla looked away. "Life, I suppose. Bad decisions, wrong people, and suddenly you find yourself with nothing." Ethan felt an inexplicable connection with this woman, who seemed to inhabit a world completely opposite to his own. Over the next few weeks, he began to visit her regularly. He brought her food, books, and something Layla valued even more: conversation, respect, the feeling of being seen as a person and not a social problem. One night, Ethan offered her an unoccupied apartment he owned. Layla repeatedly refused the offer until she finally accepted with one condition: she would pay a symbolic rent as soon as she could. "I don't want your pity, Ethan. I'm not a charity project." "I've never seen you that way," he replied, gently taking her hand. "I see a brilliant woman who has had bad luck." What began as an altruistic gesture soon transformed into something deeper. Ethan discovered in Layla an intelligence and sensitivity that contrasted with the superficiality of the world he frequented. She, in turn, found in him not the millionaire, but the insecure and lonely man behind the facade of success. One night, while they were having dinner in the modest apartment Layla now occupied, their gazes met in a different way. Time seemed to stop as the distance between them slowly shortened, until their lips met in a kiss neither of them had planned, but both had been waiting for. That night, two seemingly irreconcilable worlds merged. Neither could imagine the consequences of that moment of intimacy, nor how their lives would be intertwined forever. 2 months later, Layla stared at the pregnancy test in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. Positive. How would Ethan react? Would he believe it had all been calculated, an attempt to trap a rich man? Her trembling hand reached for the phone as she prepared for the most difficult conversation of her life. The restaurant where Ethan waited was one of the most exclusive in Manhattan. He had reserved a private table, away from prying eyes. His fingers drummed nervously on the white linen tablecloth. Layla had asked to meet urgently, and something in her tone had worried him. When she entered the restaurant, glances subtly turned toward the woman who, despite dressing simply, exuded a natural elegance. Ethan stood up immediately, kissing her cheek. He noticed she was pale, tense. "Is everything all right?" he asked as he helped her sit down. Layla took a deep breath. Her usually bright green eyes now showed a vulnerability that squeezed Ethan's heart. "I'm pregnant," she finally said bluntly, carefully observing his reaction. The silence that followed seemed eternal. Ethan felt the world stop momentarily. A whirlwind of emotions crossed his face: surprise, confusion, and finally, something unexpected, even for himself. A sudden joy. "Are you sure?" he asked in a voice barely audible. Layla nodded, her eyes fixed on the glass of water in front of her. "I know what you're thinking," she continued. And I want you to know I don't expect anything from you. It's not your responsibility." Ethan reached his hand across the table, taking hers. "Layla, look at me." He waited until their eyes met. "It's our child, our responsibility." Layla's surprise was evident. She had expected rejection, perhaps even accusations of having planned everything. "I don't know if I'm ready to be a mother," she confessed with a shaky voice. "And certainly, I don't want you to feel obligated to." "I'm not obligated," he interrupted her. "I'm scared, yes, but also strangely happy." That night, as they walked through Central Park, Ethan suggested she move into his apartment. The idea of starting a family together, despite being unexpected, began to take shape in his mind as something natural, something right. What neither of them could foresee was the storm ahead. The news filtered through Ethan's inner circle with the speed of a wildfire. In less than a week, rumors had reached William Reed, Ethan's father and the company's founder. "Have you completely lost your mind?" William's voice resonated in the private office. "A vagrant? Is this some kind of midlife crisis?" "Don't call her that," Ethan replied with a coldness that surprised his father. "Her name is Layla, and she's going to be your grandchild's mother." William looked at him as if he were facing a stranger. "Have you thought about the consequences? The press, our investors, the company's image, all for a whim." "It's not a whim, Dad. It's my life." "She's an opportunist," William declared, "and you're too naive to see it." The breakup with his father was just the beginning. Partners began to question his judgment. His friends, those he thought were unconditional, now looked at him with a mix of pity and mockery. Invitations to social events began to dwindle. Even Marcus, his best friend, had pulled him aside at a party. "You know I'll always support you," he had said, "but you have to admit this whole situation is strange. You barely know her." The press soon caught wind of it. "Millionaire CEO fooled by homeless woman," read a sensationalist magazine headline. Another newspaper published The Modern Fairy Tale, From Street to Mansion. Layla suffered in silence, growing more convinced each day that her presence was destroying Ethan's life. One night, while he slept, she began packing her bags. If she disappeared from his life, perhaps everything would return to normal. The baby and she would find a way to get by. She was quietly zipping up her suitcase when she felt Ethan's hand on hers. "Do you really think I'd let you go?" he asked softly. "I'm ruining your life," she replied, tears blurring her vision. "Your father, your friends, your company, everything's at risk because of me." Ethan hugged her, feeling her tremble in his arms. "Look at me," he whispered, cupping her face in his hands. "For the first time in my life, I feel like something is real, that something truly matters. I'm not giving that up. I'm not giving up on you or our child." That night, embracing in the darkness, they made a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. And as Layla finally fell asleep, Ethan stared at the ceiling, aware that the real battle was just beginning. Winter had arrived in New York, covering the city with a gray blanket that perfectly reflected the mood in the Reed Innovations offices. Ethan was in the middle of a tense board meeting, his gaze fixed on the numbers projected on the screen. But his mind miles away, in the apartment where Layla, now in her 6th month of pregnancy, rested. "Investors are nervous, Ethan." William Reed's voice, sharp as ice, interrupted his thoughts. "Your personal situation is affecting confidence in the company." Ethan took a deep breath before responding. "The last quarter's results are the best in the company's history. If investors are nervous, it's not because of management, but because of rumors and gossip that shouldn't have a place in a professional discussion." The tension in the room could be cut with a knife. Several executives avoided his gaze. Others watched with ill-concealed interest. The Cold War between father and son had become the open secret of the entire New York business world. Leaving the meeting, Marcus caught up with him in the hallway. "Your father is pressuring the board members," he said in a low voice. "He wants to force a vote of no confidence." Ethan nodded without real surprise. "And you? Whose side are you on?" Marcus seemed hurt by the question. "You know I'm always on yours. Always. But I can't deny that this whole situation is complicated. You barely know this woman." "I know her enough," Ethan replied firmly. "And I get to know her more every day. She's intelligent, strong, honest. She's been through things none of us could imagine, and she's still standing. I just want to make sure you're not being manipulated." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "You also think she's a gold digger?" "She tried to leave, Marcus. Pack her bags and leave because she didn't want to cause me trouble. I had to convince her to stay." Marcus's expression changed slightly, as if this information made him reconsider his assumptions. That night, Ethan arrived at the apartment laden with small gifts. A book Layla had mentioned, sweets from a bakery she loved, a small plush toy for the baby. He found Layla sitting by the window, her silhouette outlined against the sunset light, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "I felt you worried lately," she said without turning. "Problems at the company?" Ethan approached, gently kissing her hair. "Nothing I can't handle." Layla took his hand, forcing him to look her in the eyes. "Don't lie to me. I don't need you to protect me from the truth." During dinner, Ethan finally told her about his father's growing hostility, his friend's suspicions, the board's pressure. Layla listened in silence, her green eyes darkening with each word. "Maybe you should listen to them," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe they're right to worry. You don't really know me, Ethan." He looked at her, perplexed. "What are you talking about?" "There are things about me, about my past, that I haven't told you." Ethan's heart pounded. "Tell me then." Layla took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. "Before I was a professor, when I was in college, I was involved with someone powerful, a married professor." Her voice trembled slightly. "When I decided to end the relationship, he used his influence to destroy my reputation. He spread rumors, manipulated other professors. I ended up losing my scholarship, my credibility. I had to leave that university." Ethan listened attentively, without interrupting. "I managed to graduate from another university, reinvent my life. But then, my sister got gravely ill. Cancer. I spent all my savings on experimental treatments. I mortgaged the small apartment I had bought. When she died, I was already on the brink of ruin. And then came the depression, the inability to keep a job, the growing debts." Tears streamed freely down her cheeks now. "I'm not the innocent and pure person you imagine. I've made mistakes, I've made wrong decisions, and now I'm dragging you into this mess." Ethan moved closer to her, gently wiping away her tears. "We all have a past, Layla. We all make mistakes. What matters is who we choose to be today. And I know exactly who you are. A brave woman who has survived the unthinkable, who keeps going despite everything." That night they held each other tighter than ever, like two castaways in a storm. And while Layla slept, Ethan made a decision that would change the course of everything. If he had to choose between the family empire and the family he was about to form, his choice was clear. On the morning of March 12th, Layla's water broke. The delivery was 3 weeks early. Ethan, who was in the middle of a crucial meeting with foreign investors, abandoned everything without a second thought as soon as he received the call. Those hours at the hospital were the most intense of his life. Holding Layla's hand, encouraging her through each contraction, feeling a fear and emotion he had never experienced. "One last push!" exclaimed the doctor. "I see the head!" And then the most beautiful sound he had ever heard filled the room, the loud, clear cry of his daughter. When she was placed in Layla's arms, both cried uncontrollably. Sophia, he whispered. Layla? She looked at those little eyes opening to contemplate the world for the first time. She will be called Sophia. Ethan nodded, unable to speak from emotion. At that instant, he knew nothing would ever be the same, and when he held Sophia in his arms for the first time, an absolute certainty seized him. He would do anything to protect his family, no matter the price. What he didn't know was that, while he was experiencing the happiest moment of his life, an extraordinary meeting was taking place in the boardroom of Reed Innovations, a meeting in which his future in the company, which he had helped build, was being decided in his absence. The living room of their apartment, once impeccably decorated but cold, was now overrun with toys, colorful little clothes, and the constant coming and going of two first-time parents. Ethan, with Sophia in his arms, looked at her as if she were the eighth wonder of the world as he fed her a bottle. The little girl, barely 2 months old, already showed traits of both of them, Layla's green eyes and Ethan's stubborn determination. The sound of the phone interrupted the moment. It was Marcus, whose voice sounded tense, worried. "Your father has called an extraordinary meeting for tomorrow," he announced without preamble. "They're going to vote on your removal as CEO." Despite having anticipated this move, the news hit Ethan hard. He looked at his daughter, who observed him with those huge, curious eyes, oblivious to the whirlwind hanging over their family. "Thanks for letting me know," he replied, with a calm he didn't feel. "I'll be there." And when he hung up, Layla was already standing in front of him, her face a mask of concern. "What happened?" Ethan explained the situation as he placed Sophia, now asleep, in her crib. Layla listened in silence, her face darkening more and more. "All of this is my fault," she finally said. "If I hadn't appeared in your life, if you hadn't appeared in mine, I would still be a puppet," he interrupted her, taking her face in his hands. "An empty man working to impress a father who has never valued anything beyond money and power." That night, while Layla slept, Ethan stayed awake, contemplating the possibilities. He had no illusions. Most of the board would side with his father. William Reed had built that empire from scratch. He inspired loyalty and fear in equal measure. Fighting him was like facing a hurricane. The next morning came too quickly. Ethan dressed in his best suit, took one last look in the mirror, and kissed Layla and Sophia, who was still asleep, before leaving. "No matter what happens today, we have the only thing that matters," he said, looking at his small family. The boardroom was packed when he entered. Familiar faces. Some who had watched him grow up, observed him with expressions ranging from discomfort, pity, and, in some cases, barely disguised satisfaction. His father presided over the table, his face an impenetrable mask. "Ethan," he greeted him with professional coldness. "Take a seat. We were about to begin." For the next hour, Ethan listened as his management was questioned, as his personal life was dissected, as if it were a corporate case study. The word judgment was repeated constantly. Lack of judgment in getting involved with a woman of dubious reputation. Lack of judgment in assuming paternity without conclusive proof. Lack of judgment in allowing his private life to affect the company's public image, Embaro's image. When it was finally his turn to speak, Ethan slowly stood up, looked at each of those present before beginning. "For years I have given my life to this company. I have sacrificed relationships, time, health, and I did it willingly because I believed in what we were building." He paused, his eyes lingering on his father. "But now I realize that what we have built is a facade, a castle of sand based on appearances, on what others think, on the fear of being different." The silence in the room was absolute. "Layla and Sophia have taught me what is truly important, And if I have to choose between this world of superficiality and my family, there is no choice possible." He took an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table. "This is my voluntary resignation as CEO. I will keep my shares, of course, but I will no longer be part of a place where a person's worth is measured by their bank account or social origin." A murmur immediately spread through the room. William Reed stood up, his face red with anger. "Is this how you thank me for everything I've done for you? Throwing away my life's work for an affair with a vagrant?" Ethan felt something break inside him. Years of respect, even fear, turned into a sudden clarity. "Layla has more dignity and worth in her little finger than most of the people I've known in this world," he replied in a calm but firm voice. "And Sophia will learn that true wealth is in being true to yourself, not in pleasing others' expectations." He turned towards the door, but before leaving, he turned one last time. "I'm your son, Dad, and I will always hope that someday you understand that there are things more important than power and money. When you're ready to truly meet your granddaughter, the doors of our house will be open." As he left the building, he felt a strange mix of loss and liberation. 20 years of his life were behind him, but ahead lay an uncertain future, and for the first time, genuinely his own. Layla was waiting for him at home, her face reflecting the anxiety of waiting. She didn't need words to understand what had happened. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, hugging him. "Don't be sorry," he replied, kissing her forehead. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am and what I want." That night, as they watched Sophia sleep in her crib, Ethan took Layla's hand. "I have an idea," he said, with a smile she hadn't seen in weeks. "Remember that small publishing business you told me about? The one you always dreamed of owning?" Layla's eyes lit up with understanding. "Ethan, you can't—" "Why not? I have capital. You have the knowledge and passion. We can build something together, something that is truly ours." The idea quickly took shape. An independent publishing house, specializing in discovering new talents, giving a voice to those who didn't have one. They would call it New Horizons. What neither of them could imagine that night, as they dreamed of their shared future, was that this small project, born of a personal crisis, would become, in just 5 years, one of the most innovative and respected publishing houses in America. Nor could they foresee how that unexpected turn in their lives would end up connecting them with a secret that would forever change the Reed family dynamic. The small office in the Greenwich Village neighborhood hummed with activity. Though modest compared to the luxurious corporate spaces Ethan was accustomed to, it had an authentic energy, an enthusiasm he had never felt in the Reed Innovations offices. "We have a response from Gabriel Garcia Marquez," exclaimed Layla, rushing in with a paper in her hand. "He has agreed to write the prologue for the anthology of new Latin American writers." Ethan's eyes lit up. A year had passed since his dramatic departure from the family company, and every small victory for New Horizons felt like a validation of his decision. The publishing house, born as a modest project, had quickly found its niche. Quality literature from unknown authors, new voices that the big publishers ignored. The first success had come with Shadows of Yesterday, a novel written by a former street acquaintance of Layla's, a man who had been a university professor before alcoholism destroyed his life. Layla had a natural talent for discovering diamonds in the rough, while Ethan contributed his strategic vision and contacts. Together they formed an unstoppable team, complementing each other perfectly. Sophia, now 15 months old, crawled happily on the office floor under the watchful eye of Clara, the assistant they had hired. The little girl was already the soul of the publishing house, winning over authors and employees alike with her contagious smile and budding steps. "We should celebrate," Ethan suggested, hugging Layla. "Dinner at home. Let's invite the team." Their apartment, much more modest than Ethan's previous luxurious residence, but infinitely warmer, was filled that night with laughter and passionate conversations about literature, art, and shared dreams. Observing the scene, Ethan couldn't help but compare those genuine gatherings with the cold social events of his previous life. The absence that silently weighed on his heart was that of his father. Since his departure from the company, they hadn't spoken again. William Reed had systematically ignored invitations to meet his granddaughter, maintaining a barrier of wounded pride. Marcus was the only link he maintained with his previous life. His friend, who was still at Reed Innovations, visited him regularly and kept him informed about events at the company. "Your father isn't taking it well," he had confessed on his last visit. "The company is working, of course, but it's not the same without you. And he refuses to admit it, of course." Pride was always his greatest weakness, Ethan had replied with a mix of sadness and resignation. One spring morning, as Ethan reviewed the last quarter's numbers, surprisingly positive for such a young publishing house, he received an unexpected call. "Mr. Reed, this is Sarah Thompson, your father's personal assistant." The voice on the other end of the phone sounded tense. "Your father has suffered a heart attack. He's stable, but doctors recommend complete rest." Ethan's world stopped momentarily. Despite the differences of the months of silence, the news hit him hard. "Which hospital is he in?" he asked in a voice he barely recognized as his own. 2 hours later, he found himself in front of the private room where his father was recovering. He hesitated for a moment before gently knocking. The image that greeted him was shocking. William Reed, always imposing, always vital, seemed to have aged 10 years. Connected to various monitors, his face showed a paleness that scared Ethan. "Dad," he simply said, approaching the bed. William slowly opened his eyes. For a moment, a glimmer of emotion appeared in them, quickly replaced by the familiar expression of reserve. "Ethan," he responded in a weak voice, "you didn't have to come." "I'm your son," he simply replied, sitting by the bed. "How are you feeling?" The conversation that followed was awkward, full of silences and half-phrases. William formally asked about Sophia, without showing genuine interest. Ethan responded politely, without pushing. After 20 minutes, the nurse entered to indicate that the patient needed to rest. "I'll be back tomorrow," Ethan promised, getting up. "It's not necessary," his father insisted. "I know," he simply replied before leaving. Over the next few weeks, Ethan visited the hospital daily. Each time, the conversation was a little less tense, a little more real. One day, he brought photos of Sophia. Another day, he shared some anecdotes about the publishing house, surprised to see genuine interest in his father's eyes. The day William was discharged, Ethan was there to accompany him home. "The doctor insists you can't be alone," he explained, as he helped him settle into the living room of the family mansion. "I've hired a nurse who will be with you during the day, and I'll come every night to sleep here until you're recovered." William looked at him with surprise. "Why would you do that, after how I treated you?" Ethan held his gaze. "Because you're my father, and because I believe we've both lost too much time already." That night, as they had dinner in almost comfortable silence, William seemed to make a decision. "I would like to," he began with visible difficulty. "I would like to meet my granddaughter. If you and Layla are okay with it." Ethan's heart leaped. "Nothing would make me happier," he replied sincerely. What neither of them could imagine then was that this rapprochement, born of a health crisis, would be the catalyst for a chain of events that would unearth deeply buried family secrets and forever change the relationship between father and son. And as Ethan drove back home that night, his heart lighter than it had been in months, a figure observed the Reed mansion from a car parked on the opposite side of the street. A figure from the past who would soon burst into their lives with revelations none were prepared to face. Sophia's first visit to her grandfather's house went better than Ethan had imagined. The little girl, now almost 2 years old, charmed William with her mix of sweetness and determination. It didn't go unnoticed by Ethan how his father, usually austere, smiled at the girl's mischievousness. "She has your character," William commented, as he watched Sophia insist on climbing the garden stairs by herself. "That stubbornness is a Reed, no doubt." The comment caused an uncomfortable glance between Ethan and Layla. Although relations with William had improved considerably in recent months, there was some tension when it came to Layla. The patriarch was polite but distant with her, as if he still couldn't fully accept her presence in the family. "Ethan, can I speak with you privately?" William asked at the end of the afternoon, while Layla helped Sophia pick up the toys they had scattered around the living room. In the study, his father seemed suddenly nervous, something completely unusual for him. "I've been thinking," he began, avoiding eye contact, "about reincorporating you into the company." Ethan couldn't hide his surprise. "Dad, not as CEO, at least not yet," William continued quickly, "but in an important management position. The company needs you, son. I need you." The offer was unexpected. Ethan thought of new horizons, of the work he and Layla had built together, of the freedom and authenticity that were now part of their daily lives. "I appreciate the offer," he replied carefully, "but my life has taken a different course. The publishing house is growing. We have exciting projects." The disappointment on his father's face was evident. "I understand," William said, though it was clear he didn't truly. "The door will always be open if you change your mind." During the drive back home, Layla noticed the concern on Ethan's face. "Is something wrong?" she asked, as Sophia slept peacefully in her car seat. Ethan told her about his father's offer. To his surprise, Layla didn't seem to reject the idea outright. "Have you considered accepting?" she asked cautiously. "Do you think I should?" Ethan was genuinely surprised. "I think you should do what makes you happy," she replied sincerely. "And I know how important it is for you to fully reconcile with your father." The conversation continued at home. Once Sophia was asleep, Ethan expressed his doubts, his fears of becoming trapped again in a life that no longer felt like his own. Layla listened, offering perspective without pushing. "Perhaps there's a middle ground," she finally suggested. "You could get partially involved with Reed without abandoning the publishing house. A couple of days a week, perhaps." The idea resonated with Ethan, a way to build bridges without sacrificing what they had built. The next morning, as he was about to call his father to discuss this possibility, the phone rang first. It was Marcus, and his voice sounded urgent. "Ethan, you have to come to the office now." "What's going on?" "It's better if you see it for yourself. Just come as soon as possible." The concern in his friend's voice was unmistakable. Ethan dressed quickly, kissed Layla and Sophia, who was still asleep, and headed to the Reed Innovations offices. Upon arriving, he found a tense atmosphere. Several secretaries looked at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity. Marcus was waiting for him in the lobby, his face a mask of concern. "They're in the boardroom," he simply said, guiding him towards the elevator. "Who's there?" "Marcus, what's happening?" "Your father and woman." She arrived this morning demanding to see him. When she mentioned your name and Layla's, William ordered her to be taken to the boardroom immediately. Ethan's heart pounded as they walked down the hallway towards the imposing oak door. Marcus opened it without knocking. Inside, sitting at opposite ends of the long table, were William and a middle-aged woman. There was something vaguely familiar about her, though Ethan was sure he hadn't seen her before. "Son, William said, standing up. His face showed an alarming pallor. "This is Vera Jenkins. She says she's Layla's sister." Time seemed to stop. "Impossible," Ethan replied automatically. "Layla's sister died years ago, of cancer." The woman looked directly at him, her eyes, the same intense green as Layla's, full of complex emotion. "Is that what she told you, didn't she?" Her voice had a bitter edge. Typical Sylvia. She was always good at making up stories. Sylvia? Ethan felt the ground moving beneath him. "That's her real name. Sylvia Jenkins. Not Layla Vega, or whatever other identity she's invented this time." William intervened, his voice controlled but tense. "This woman claims your partner has a history of fraud, that she's been involved in several scams using different identities." "That's absurd," Ethan replied, though an inexplicable cold spread through his chest. "Layla was a professor. She has a university degree. She told me her whole story." Vera pulled a folder from the bag resting beside her. "Everything I'm going to show you is verifiable," she said, spreading various documents on the table. Photographs, newspaper clippings, police reports. My sister is many things, but a professor isn't one of them. With trembling hands, Ethan began to review the documents. Photographs of Layla, or Sylvia, with different appearances, different names. Clippings from local newspapers reporting minor scams. A police report mentioning Sylvia Jenkins as a suspect in a fraud case that never went to trial due to lack of conclusive evidence. "Why are you showing us this now?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Vera sighed, suddenly looking tired. "Because I've been looking for her for years. Because, despite everything, she's my sister and I love her. And because when I saw your photo in that article about the publishing house," she paused. "I'd never seen her like that. Happy, stable, with a family. I thought maybe, this time." The silence that followed was dense, oppressive. William looked at his son with a mix of concern and something that almost seemed like pity. "I need to talk to Layla," Ethan finally said, standing up. "Sylvia," Vera gently corrected. "Her name is Sylvia." As he left the room, Marcus followed him, visibly worried. "Do you want me to come with you?" Ethan shook his head. "This is something I have to do alone." The drive home was the longest of his life. His mind replayed every conversation with Layla, every detail of her story, searching for inconsistencies, signs he had overlooked. Was it possible that everything was an elaborate lie? What did that mean for their relationship, for Sophia, for the life they had built together? Opening the apartment door, he found Layla playing with Sophia on the living room rug. The scene, so domestic, so perfect, contrasted brutally with the whirlwind inside him. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, alarmed by his expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way, I have," he replied, closing the door behind him. "I think we need to talk." "Sylvia." The color instantly drained from Layla's face. Her eyes, those green eyes he loved so much, filled with a terror that confirmed his worst fears before she could even utter a word. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of Sophia playing, oblivious to the emotional earthquake shaking her parents. Layla, or Sylvia, remained motionless, her face a mask of contained panic. "How?" she finally began. Her voice barely audible. "Your sister is alive," Ethan replied, carefully observing her reaction. "Vera. She came to my father's office this morning." Layla sank onto the couch, as if her legs could no longer support her. For a long moment, she stared at Sophia, who was building a tower with colorful blocks, knocking it down with delightful laughter. "I didn't want this to happen," she finally said, looking up at Ethan. "Not like this." "What part exactly?" Ethan's voice was controlled, but the pain was evident. The part where you lie to me about who you are, where you invent a whole life that never existed. Not everything was a lie, she protested. She protested weakly. What was true then? Your name? Your past? The love you said you felt for me? The last question hung in the air, laden with raw pain. Layla, Sylvia. She approached him, trying to take his hand. Ethan instinctively stepped back. The love is real, she said intensely. What I feel for you, for Sophia, is the most real thing I've ever felt. Ethan shook his head, unable to process it all. I need to know the truth, all the truth, now. She nodded slowly, resigned. She approached Sophia, kissed her head, and whispered words of affection. Then, facing Ethan, she began her story. My name is Sylvia Jenkins. I was born in Boston, as I told you, but I was never a professor. I never went to university. She paused as if gathering strength. My father abandoned us when I was 6 and Vera 8. My mother drank. A lot. Vera and I were practically raised alone, surviving as best we could. Ethan listened in silence, his face unreadable. At 14, I stole for the first time. Just food at first, then small amounts of money. They caught me, but the store owner took pity and didn't press charges. At 16, I dropped out of high school. I met a man who taught me skills, how to manipulate, how to create false identities, how to gain people's trust. Her voice broke slightly. I became what people like Vera would call a con artist. Never anything big, never violence, just surviving. Using my skills to get money, a place to sleep, food. She looked directly at Ethan, her eyes suddenly fierce. But I never, ever used Sophia, not for a single moment since I knew I was pregnant. She is the purest, most real thing I've ever done in my life. And me? The question escaped Ethan's lips before he could contain it. Am I just another scam? The pain in Sylvia's eyes was so deep it was almost physical. At first, yes, she confessed, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. When I saw you that rainy night, with your expensive suit and your air of an important man, I saw an opportunity. But then you talked to me as if I were a real person. You treated me with respect. You listened to me. She stopped, taking a trembling breath. And then, at some point, I can't even identify, it stopped being a scam. I fell in love with you, Ethan, with your kindness, your strength, how you saw me, not as a vagrant or an opportunity, but as a complete woman. For the first time in my life, I wanted to be the person you believed I was. The silence that followed was dense, laden with contradictory emotions. Ethan walked to the window, needing space, distance to process everything he had just heard. The pregnancy, he began without turning. Was it planned? No, she replied immediately. It was as surprising for me as it was for you. And I was about to leave, Ethan, to disappear as I always had, but I couldn't, not just because of the baby, but because of you, because of what we had built. Sophia, sensing the tension in the room, approached her mother, hugging her legs. Sylvia lifted her into her arms, kissing her dark hair. The publishing house, Ethan continued, still with his back turned. Was that also part of some... No, I always loved books. That wasn't a lie. They were my escape when I was a child. And the idea of the publishing house was a real dream, something I had never allowed myself to truly wish for, because it seemed impossible for someone like me. Finally, Ethan turned to look at her. His face showed infinite tiredness. Is there anything else I should know? Any other secret? Any other lie? Sylvia hesitated for just an instant, but long enough for Ethan to notice. My sister, she finally said, didn't die of cancer. We had a fight years ago over my lifestyle. She tried to help me many times, and I always ended up disappointing her. She finally told me she couldn't keep watching me destroy my life, that when I was ready to change, to look for her. I never did. Until now. Ethan nodded slowly, assimilating this last piece of the puzzle. I need time, he finally said. I need to think about all of this. Are you going to leave me? Sylvia's voice was small, vulnerable, as he had never heard it before. I don't know, he replied honestly. I don't know what I'm going to do. He approached them, kissed Sophia's forehead, and then, after a moment of doubt, Sylvia's cheek. I'll be back later. I need air. When the door closed behind him, Sylvia collapsed onto the sofa, hugging Sophia as if she were a lifeline in a storm. The child, sensing her mother's pain, remained unusually quiet, her small hands caressing Sylvia's face, wiping away tears that wouldn't stop flowing. Everything will be okay, Mommy, the little girl said, with that innocent wisdom of children. Daddy always comes back. He promised. Sylvia nodded, unable to speak. At that moment, contemplating her daughter, she made a decision. Whatever the outcome of that crisis, whatever Ethan's decision, she would never again be the person she had been. For Sophia, for the love she felt for Ethan, and perhaps for the first time in her life, for herself. Meanwhile, Ethan walked aimlessly through the streets of New York, his mind a whirlwind of contradictory emotions, rage, pain, confusion, and, surprisingly, a persistent feeling of love that refused to disappear despite everything that had happened. What he didn't know, as he tried to find clarity in the chaos of his thoughts, was that this revelation was only the beginning, that the real secret, the one that would change not only his relationship with Sylvia, but the entire Reed family dynamic, was yet to be discovered. Night had fallen over New York when Ethan finally stopped his erratic steps in front of a small cafe in Soho. He had walked for hours, his mind replaying every moment with Layla. With Sylvia, he corrected himself, searching for signs, clues, anything that could have warned him of the truth. He sat at a secluded table, ordered a black coffee, and watched the couples and groups of friends laughing and talking around him. Normal people with normal lives, without devastating secrets that threatened to destroy everything they believed was real. His phone rang. It was Marcus. Are you all right? His friend asked, concern evident in his voice. Your father is worried. We all are. I've been better, Ethan replied bitterly. My life is a lie, Marcus. The woman I love, I don't even know who she really is. Do you want me to come over? Do you need to talk? Ethan was about to accept, but something stopped him. Thanks, but I need to be alone right now. I have a lot to think about. After hanging up, his gaze fell on a family entering the cafe. A man, a woman, and a small girl, perhaps a little older than Sophia. The girl laughed as her father lifted her in his arms, her mother watching the scene with obvious love. A normal family, built on truths, not lies. The thought of Sophia, of her smile when he came home, of her small arms reaching out to him, caused a sharp pain in his chest. No matter what Sylvia had done, no matter who she really was, Sophia was innocent. His daughter. His responsibility. The mental image of Sophia gave way to another, Sylvia during childbirth, exhausted but radiant, holding her newborn with an almost sacred reverence. Was it possible to fake that love? Was it possible to maintain such an elaborate lie for so long without some truth leaking through? Can I get you anything else, sir? The waitress's voice interrupted his thoughts. No, thank you. He paid and walked out into the New York night, now with a clear destination in mind. His father's house was lit when he arrived. William opened the door personally, something unusual. His usually stoic expression showed genuine concern. "Son," he simply said, stepping back to let him in. In the living room, to Ethan's surprise, Vera was waiting. The woman stood up when she saw him, her face a mask of discomfort and determination. "I'm sorry to appear in your life like this," she said without preamble. "But I needed to find her. I needed to know if she's okay." Ethan studied her face, so similar to Sylvia's in some respects. "Why now?" he asked. "Years have passed." Vera sighed, sitting back down. "Our mother died 6 months ago. Her last wish was for the family to reunite. I've been looking for Sylvia ever since, following clues, rumors, until I saw that article about your publishing house. Why talk to my father first? Why not come directly to us?" The question implied an accusation that didn't go unnoticed by William. "That was my idea," the patriarch intervened. "When Vera showed up at the company asking about you and Sylvia, I sensed something wasn't right. I asked her to tell me everything before contacting you. To protect me," Ethan concluded, with a mix of gratitude and resentment. "As always." William didn't respond, but his gaze spoke for itself. "What I want to know," Ethan continued, addressing Vera, "is what you intend to do now. Have you come to take her away? To denounce her? To destroy our family?" The harshness in his voice surprised both listeners, and perhaps himself. "I've come to see if she has finally found her way," Vera replied calmly. "If this new beginning is real, or just another of her temporary identities, if my niece is okay." "Sophia is perfectly fine," Ethan replied automatically. "She's happy. She's healthy. She's loved. And Sylvia, is she happy too?" The simple question brought a lump to Ethan's throat. "I thought she was," he finally replied. "Until today." William, who had remained unusually silent, approached his son. "Ethan, I understand you're hurt, confused, but you need to think clearly now. This woman, whoever she is, has lied to you from the beginning. She has built a life with you based on falsehoods. And does that invalidate everything else?" The question came from Ethan's heart. "The moments together, the connection, the family we've created, is all that fake too?" Vera gently intervened. "Sylvia, my sister, was always an expert at creating characters, at becoming exactly what others needed her to be. It's her gift and her curse." "Are you saying it was all calculated? Every moment, every tear, every laugh?" "I'm saying," Vera responded carefully, "that Sylvia has lived so many lives, been so many different people, that sometimes she doesn't even know who she really is. But I also believe that if she has stayed in one place with the same identity for almost 3 years, perhaps this time it's different." Ethan felt a strange hope blossom among the ashes of his disillusionment. "Your father told me how you met her," Vera continued. "Living on the street, vulnerable. The Sylvia I know would have taken that opportunity to manipulate you, to get quick money and disappear. I would never have seen her stay, build something real." William watched the exchange with an indecipherable expression. Finally, sighing deeply, he spoke. "Son, you know I never approved of this relationship. I thought she was using you, that she only saw your money, your position, and maybe I was partly right. But I've also seen how she looks at Sophia, how she looks at you. And that," he paused, as if the words cost him an effort, "that can't be faked, not for so long." His father's admission, so unexpected, left Ethan momentarily speechless. "What should I do?" he finally asked, more to himself than to his interlocutors. "Only you can answer that," Vera replied. "But I think you should ask yourself who Sylvia is to you now, not who she was in the past." Ethan stayed at his father's house late into the night, talking with Vera, learning details of Sylvia's childhood, of her first steps on the path that would eventually lead her to become an expert in the art of deception. Each piece of information, each anecdote, completed a puzzle that began to show a coherent image. That of a wounded child who had found a way to survive in lies. It was almost dawn when Ethan finally returned to his apartment. Opening the door, he found Sylvia asleep on the sofa, clearly having tried to wait up for him. Beside her, in an open envelope, he saw what looked like official documents. He approached silently and examined them. They were application papers to legalize her true name, to officially register Sophia with her real data, to regularize her tax situation. The attempt to do things right, to face her past, instead of running from it, moved him deeply. Carefully not to wake her, he sat beside her, observing her sleeping face. Now that he knew the truth, he saw a different person. The woman sleeping in front of him, with traces of tears on her cheeks, was the same woman who had shared his dreams, his fears, his life for the past 3 years. The same woman who had given birth to his daughter, who had built a publishing house with him from scratch, who had supported him when everyone else turned their backs. Sylvia slowly opened her eyes, startling when she saw him. "You came back?" she whispered, as if fearing it was a hallucination. "I came back," he confirmed, taking her hand. "To stay or to say goodbye?" she asked, fear evident in her voice. Ethan was silent for a moment, searching for the right words. "I met your sister today," he finally said. "She told me things about you, about your childhood." Sylvia tensed visibly. "Vera is here in New York. She's at my father's house. She wants to see you." A heavy silence settled between them. Finally, Sylvia spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you hate me now that you know who I really am?" Ethan held her gaze, searching in those green eyes for the woman he loved, the mother of his child, the partner with whom he had built a shared dream. "I don't know if I truly know you, Sylvia, but I want to. I want to know the real you, not the character you created for me." Tears began to stream down Sylvia's cheeks. "I'm scared," she confessed. "Scared that when you know the real Sylvia, you won't want to be with me anymore." "That's a risk we'll have to take," he replied honestly. "But I believe the real Sylvia has been emerging little by little these past years in the way you love Sophia, and how you've brought the publishing house to life, in the small gestures of every day." He leaned towards her, gently kissing her lips. "It won't be easy," he continued. "There's trust to rebuild, truths to face, but I'm willing to try if you are." Sylvia nodded, unable to speak through her tears. That dawn, as New York began to awaken, 2 wounded people decided to bet on the truth, however difficult and painful it might be. What they couldn't know, as they hugged on the sofa like 2 castaways who had survived a storm, was that the biggest secret, the one that would change not only their relationship, but the entire Reed family dynamic, was yet to be revealed. The following weeks unfolded like a delicate exercise in reconstruction. Each conversation between Ethan and Sylvia seemed to unearth a new layer of truth, painful but necessary. Each revelation was followed by moments of tension, of doubt, but also by a growing sense of authenticity that neither of them had experienced before. Sylvia began using her true name, first only with Ethan, then with their small circle of close friends. To the outside world, she was still Layla Vega, the talented editor and dedicated mother. But within the walls of their home, she was learning to be simply Sylvia. The reunion with Vera was stormy at first. Years of resentment, of silences, of divergent paths weighed heavily between the sisters. But there was also an undeniable bond, a shared history that no one else could fully understand. "I never thought I'd see you like this," Vera commented one afternoon, watching Sylvia read a story to Sophia. "Settled, with a family, a legitimate business." "Me neither," Sylvia confessed with a sad smile. I was always too busy being someone else to discover who I could really be. The relationship between Ethan and his father was also undergoing subtle but significant changes. William, against all odds, seemed to have developed a reluctant respect for Sylvia after learning her full story. She survived, he commented to Ethan, during one of their frequent dinners, now reinstated as a family tradition. With the tools she had, she did what she could to survive. I can't judge her for that. New Horizons Publishing continued to thrive. The latest book they had published, a graphic novel about the experience of living on the streets, was receiving critical acclaim and promising sales. It had been Sylvia's idea, inspired by her own experience, and Ethan couldn't help but feel proud of the courage with which she now faced her past. One afternoon, while reviewing contracts in the office, Sylvia abruptly looked up. "Do you know what day it is today?" she asked, with a nostalgic smile. Ethan mentally checked the calendar. "Thursday? It's exactly 3 years since we met," she replied. "In the rain, at that doorway." The memory evoked a strange mix of emotions in Ethan. It seemed like a different life, a different world. "I've never asked you," she continued cautiously, "if you regret stopping that night." The question hung in the air, laden with meaning. Ethan carefully considered his answer. "There were moments, especially when I discovered the truth, when I wondered," he admitted. "But now, looking at everything we've built together, no, I don't regret it. Not for a second." Sylvia's smile lit up the room, that genuine smile he had learned to recognize among the many masks she had worn throughout her life. "That night I was considering giving up," she confessed in a low voice. "I had reached a point where I saw no way out, and then you appeared, with your expensive suit and your prince-like manners." "Hardly a prince," Ethan laughed. "For someone who had hit rock bottom, you were," she replied seriously. "Not because of the money or the position, but because of the dignity with which you treated me, as if I were a real person, not a problem or a statistic." That night, they decided to celebrate their special anniversary with a private dinner. They left Sophia with Vera, who had temporarily moved to New York to reconnect with her sister, and booked a table at the same restaurant where Sylvia had told him about her pregnancy. The evening was flowing with renewed intimacy when Ethan received a call from Marcus. He was about to silence the phone when he noticed the insistence. It was the third call in 5 minutes. "It must be important," he apologized, standing up to answer. Marcus's voice sounded distraught. "Ethan, I need you to come to Mount Sinai Hospital immediately. It's your father." The world seemed to stop. What happened? Another heart attack? Doctors aren't sure yet. He collapsed during a meeting. He's stable, but we're heading there, he interrupted, motioning to Sylvia. The drive to the hospital was a blur of streets and lights. Sylvia held his hand firmly, offering silent support. Upon arriving, they found Marcus in the waiting room, his face a mask of concern. "He's in intensive care," he informed. "The doctors are running tests." The hours that followed were an agonizing wait. Finally, a doctor approached them. "Family of William Reed?" Ethan stood up immediately. "I'm his son. Your father has suffered a minor stroke," the doctor explained. "We've managed to stabilize him, but he'll need rehabilitation and complete rest for several weeks." The relief Ethan felt was momentary, quickly replaced by new concern. "Sequelae? It's too early to say for sure, but for now, it seems to have mainly affected his mobility on the left side. His cognitive ability seems intact, though he's a bit confused, which is normal after such an episode." When they were finally allowed to visit him, Ethan barely recognized the man in the hospital bed. William Reed, always imposing, always in control, seemed suddenly fragile, diminished. "Son," he whispered in a weak voice, trying to force a smile. "I'm here, Dad," Ethan replied, taking his hand. "Everything will be all right." William looked past him, towards Sylvia, who was waiting discreetly at the door. Sylvia, he said with effort. "Please come." She approached cautiously, visibly surprised by the request. "I need to talk with both of you," William continued, each word a clear effort. "There's something you need to know, something I've kept silent for too long." Ethan and Sylvia exchanged a worried glance. What could be so important that William insisted on speaking now, in his condition? "Dad, you should rest," Ethan intervened gently. "We can talk when you feel better." "No." William's voice suddenly acquired a familiar firmness. "I've been close to dying twice in less than a year. I won't wait any longer." He took a deep breath, visibly gathering strength. 35 years ago, he began. I met a woman, Clara. She was different from anyone I had ever met before. Intense, passionate, free. Ethan listened with growing confusion. Why was his father telling him about an old lover at this moment? "Your mother and I were going through a rough patch," William continued. "We barely spoke. And Clara was an escape, an adventure that shouldn't have happened." He paused, briefly closing his eyes. "When it ended, months later, I found out she was pregnant." The impact of those words hit Ethan like a physical blow. "What are you saying, Dad?" William looked directly at Sylvia, his eyes laden with an indecipherable emotion. "Clara Jenkins. She was from Boston. She had a young daughter from a previous marriage. Vera." The world seemed to stop for Sylvia. "Clara Jenkins? My mother?" Her voice was barely audible. William nodded weakly. "I never saw her again after that last conversation. She told me she would raise the baby alone, that she didn't need anything from me. And I, cowardly, accepted it. I went back to your mother. We tried to rebuild our marriage. You were born a year later, Ethan." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, almost tangible. Ethan looked at Sylvia, who seemed to have gone into shock. "Are you saying," she began, her voice trembling, "are you saying you're my father?" William nodded again, a single tear sliding down his cheek. "I knew it as soon as I saw you in that article about the publishing house. You have her eyes, her smile, but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to face it. And then, when your sister appeared, confirming you were Clara's daughter." "Why didn't you say anything then?" Ethan interrupted, his voice a mix of disbelief and rage. "Because I was a coward," William replied simply. "Because I was afraid of losing your respect, son. Because I didn't know how to face 35 years of absence." The room seemed to spin around Ethan. Sylvia, his partner, the mother of his child, was also his sister, his half-sister. "This is," he began, unable to find words to describe the whirlwind of emotions that swept through him. "I'm sorry," William whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Sylvia abruptly stood up, her face as pale as chalk. Without a word, she quickly left the room. Ethan debated for a moment whether to follow her or stay with his father, with the man who had just shattered his world. "Go with her," William said weakly. "She needs you now." Ethan found Sylvia in the hallway, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, her gaze lost. "Siblings?" she whispered when she saw him approach. "We're siblings." The word hung between them, loaded with a new and terrible meaning. Ethan sat beside her, feeling the ground open beneath him. "Half-siblings," he corrected automatically, as if that distinction mattered at all. "Sophia!" Sylvia began, horror visible in her eyes. The thought of their daughter, of the genetic, ethical, emotional implications of that revelation, fell upon them with an overwhelming weight. and as the world they had built together seemed to crumble around them, a nurse approached, oblivious to the drama unfolding. "Mr. Reed, your father is asking for you." Ethan and Sylvia exchanged a look filled with impossible emotions. The past had just caught up to them, with a cruelty neither could have imagined. And the future, that future they had so carefully begun to rebuild, now seemed as fragile as a house of cards in a hurricane. 3 days had passed since the devastating revelation at the hospital. 3 days in which Ethan and Sylvia had barely exchanged words beyond what was strictly necessary to care for Sophia, maintaining a facade of normalcy that crumbled every time their gazes met. Sylvia had temporarily moved into the guest room without Ethan protesting. The abyss between them seemed insurmountable, laden with a silent horror that neither dared to fully name. Vera, who now knew the whole truth, had unexpectedly become their anchor. She took care of Sophia when the tension in the apartment became unbearable. She kept daily routines functioning and served as an intermediary between two people who suddenly didn't know how to talk to each other. "This can't go on," Vera finally said one afternoon after putting Sophia down for her nap. "You have to talk, really talk." Ethan, who was distractedly reviewing publishing contracts without really processing them, looked up. "Talk about what exactly? About how my father has condemned us all? About how our relationship—" He stopped, unable to utter the word. "Incestuous," Vera completed bluntly. "That's the word you've been avoiding." Sylvia, who was entering the living room at that moment, stopped abruptly upon hearing that. Her face, already pale from days of insomnia and anguish, lost the little color it had left. "Vera, please," she whispered. "No, stop avoiding reality," her sister replied firmly. "Yes, this situation is horrible. Yes, it's a shock to everyone. But hiding in separate rooms and communicating through notes like teenagers isn't going to solve anything." The silence that followed was dense, laden with suppressed emotions. Finally, Ethan spoke. "What are we supposed to do? Go on as if nothing happened? Separate? What will we tell Sophia?" The mention of their daughter seemed to break something within Sylvia, who slumped onto the sofa, tears flowing freely. "I don't know," she confessed in a broken voice. "I don't know how to process this. I don't know how to look at you without thinking that, without remembering that." Vera looked at them both with compassion. "Perhaps you should start there, by admitting that you don't know what to do, that you're lost." Ethan slowly nodded. He approached the sofa, sitting next to Sylvia, though maintaining a prudent distance. "I'm furious," he confessed, his voice controlled but intense. "With my father, with fate, with whoever is responsible for this cruelty. Just when we were finally finding our way, just when we were starting to build something true," Sylvia continued, wiping her tears with her sleeve. "Everything good I had finally found, contaminated by this horrible truth." Vera observed them in silence, allowing them to finally give voice to what they had been holding back. "I've been thinking," Ethan said after a long silence. "Maybe we should confirm if it's true. A DNA test." Sylvia looked at him, surprised. "Do you think your father would lie about something like that?" "I don't know. Maybe not intentionally. He's been under a lot of pressure. His health is compromised. Maybe he's confused. Maybe he mixed up memories." Hope, that small ray of light in the midst of darkness, briefly appeared in Sylvia's eyes. "It would be so easy," she murmured. "So simple. A mistake, a confusion, and we could go back to what we were," Ethan completed, his voice laden with longing. "To our family." Vera gently intervened. "If you decide to do the test, you must be prepared for both results. Hope can be as cruel as truth sometimes." That night, after Sophia fell asleep, Ethan and Sylvia sat in the kitchen with 2 cups of tea that neither drank. They had agreed to do the DNA test the next day. "Have you visited your father?" Sylvia asked, breaking the silence. Ethan shook his head. "I can't face him right now. Not without hating him? Something like that." He paused, studying her face. "How are you handling it? He's your father too, after all." Sylvia let out a bitter laugh. "A father I never knew. A father who abandoned us and then, by some twisted cosmic joke, re-entered my life in the worst possible way. If the tests confirm that we are siblings," Ethan began with difficulty, "what will we do?" The question hung between them, heavy with impossible implications. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "The idea of separating breaks my heart, but continuing, knowing what we know, it seems just as impossible," he completed. The silence settled again, but this time, there was a faint, shared understanding. They had no answers, only questions and pain, but at least now they could look each other in the eye as they navigated this storm together. 2 days later, Ethan picked up the DNA test results. The envelope weighed in his hands as if it were made of lead. He had asked Sylvia to wait at home. He wanted a moment alone to process whatever it contained. Sitting on a park bench, watching children play oblivious to adult dramas, he finally mustered the courage to open it. His hands trembled as he unfolded the papers. His phone rang just then. It was Vera. "Do you have the results?" she asked without preamble. "I'm about to read them," he replied. "Wait, I think you should know something first." Something in her tone made Ethan tense. "What's going on?" "I've been talking to my mother. To Clara," Vera explained. "I've told her the whole situation. She was heartbroken, Ethan, but also surprised by something." "Why?" "She insists she never had an affair with William Reed." Ethan felt the world stop for an instant. "What?" "She says she met him, yes, more than 30 years ago. That they had a brief relationship. But she swears she didn't get pregnant by him. In fact, she's sure Sylvia is the daughter of her first husband, Robert." "That doesn't make sense," Ethan protested. "Why would my father lie about something like that?" "I don't know," Vera replied frankly. "But my mother is also willing to do a DNA test if necessary. She's as confused as all of us." Ethan looked at the paper in his hands. The results now seemed just one more piece of an increasingly complex puzzle. "I'm going to the hospital," he said abruptly. "I need to talk to my father." "And the results?" Ethan fully unfolded the paper, his eyes quickly scanning the contents until he found the conclusion. "Negative," he said aloud, almost unable to believe it. "There is no genetic relationship between us." The relief he felt was so intense it almost left him breathless, but immediately a new confusion took its place. If they weren't siblings, why had his father lied? An hour later, Ethan entered the hospital room where William was slowly recovering. His father seemed to have aged years in just a few days. "Ethan," he said with visible relief, "I was afraid you wouldn't come back." "We need to talk," he replied, placing the test results on the bed. "We're not siblings. Sylvia and I don't share genes." William's expression showed a surprise that seemed genuine. "But I was sure. When I saw her, those green eyes." "Her mother denies having had a child with you," Ethan continued, "and the genetic tests confirm it. Why did you lie, Dad? Why did you try to destroy our family with such a cruel lie?" William seemed genuinely confused. "I didn't lie, son. I truly believed it." He paused, as if trying to order distant memories. "Clara told me she was pregnant. She told me she would raise the baby alone. I never doubted that Sylvia was that baby." "And you never tried to find out? You never tried to contact your supposed child?" Shame was evident on William's face. "I was young, stupid, selfish. My marriage to your mother was in crisis. The news of a child out of wedlock would have been devastating. So I accepted Clara's decision and buried the matter." Ethan studied his father, trying to detect any sign of deception. If you truly believed it, why did you tell us? Why not keep it a secret? The stroke, William replied in a weak voice. The doctors said it could have been fatal. I faced my own mortality, son, and I realized I couldn't leave carrying that secret. I couldn't allow you to. That Sophia, his voice broke. Ethan watched him, trying to reconcile the image of the powerful authoritarian man he had known all his life with this fragile, confused, and remorseful old man. But you were wrong, he finally said. Sylvia is not your daughter. She never was. It seems Clara wasn't honest with me, William murmured. Or perhaps I misinterpreted. So many years have passed. Ethan stood up, suddenly exhausted. You almost destroyed our family over a mistaken memory, over an assumption you never bothered to confirm. I'm sorry, William whispered, tears sliding down his cheeks. I'm so sorry. Leaving the hospital, Ethan immediately called Sylvia. He needed to give her the news in person, to see her face when she knew the truth. He found her in the park near their apartment, watching Sophia play with other children. He sat beside her in silence, both contemplating their daughter for several minutes. We're not siblings, he finally said, handing her the test results. Not even half-siblings. We don't share genes. Sylvia looked at the papers without really reading them, her hands trembling slightly. Are you sure? Completely. Vera spoke with Clara. She denies having had a child with my father. Apparently, he misinterpreted something, or confused memories. Or perhaps Clara wasn't honest with him at the time. It doesn't really matter. The relief on Sylvia's face was like seeing the sun rise after days of storm. She suddenly let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hands. Ethan hugged her, feeling the weight that had been crushing them begin to dissolve. I thought we had lost everything, she whispered against his chest. I thought it was some kind of cruel punishment for my previous lies. Everything's okay, he replied, stroking her hair. We can move forward. We can be a family again. Sophia, noticing her mother crying, ran towards them with a worried expression. Mommy sad? Sylvia lifted her into her arms, kissing her cheek. No, sweetie. Mommy's happy. Very, very happy. That night, for the first time in days, they had dinner as a family. The tension that had poisoned the apartment seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a silent gratitude for the second chance they had been given. As Sophia slept, and they shared a bottle of wine on the balcony under a starry sky, Sylvia took Ethan's hand. I can't help but think, she said softly, that even if the results had been different, even if we really were what we feared, what we feel for each other, wouldn't have changed. Ethan nodded slowly. I know. It would have been devastating, impossible to continue in the same way. But love, he paused, searching for the right words. What we have goes beyond any biology. Perhaps it's selfish to say this, she continued, but I almost feel like this has made us stronger, as if the universe had tested us one last time, and we survived, he concluded, gently kissing her lips. What they couldn't imagine then was that this overcome crisis would indeed be the last major obstacle on their path to happiness, that the next 5 years would bring successes, growth, and a stability neither of them had believed possible, and that, paradoxically, William's lie, though based on an error, would end up being the catalyst for a much deeper and more significant truth. Sophia, don't run so fast, Sylvia called, watching her 6-year-old daughter speed ahead on the park path. Wait for your grandparents! The girl, her dark braids bouncing with each step, reluctantly stopped, turning to look at the adults who followed at a slower pace. Clara and William, walking side by side, smiled at their shared granddaughter's inexhaustible energy. Let her go, Clara said with a smile. At that age, I was also a whirlwind. William nodded. Ethan was the same, always 2 steps ahead and impatient to discover the world. Sylvia watched the scene with a mix of awe and gratitude. If someone had told her 5 years ago that she would be strolling peacefully with these two older adults who had become an important part of her family life, she probably would have thought it was a cruel joke. William's recovery after the stroke had been slow but steady. During that time, driven by the need to make peace with his past, he had contacted Clara. The reunion, initially tense, had gradually evolved into a mature friendship based on shared experiences and a love for Sophia. Clara, who had finally moved from Boston to New York to be close to her daughters, had turned out to be a comforting and wise presence. Her relationship with Vera had strengthened, and with Sylvia, she had slowly built the maternal bond that had always been broken. "I was thinking," William began, interrupting Sylvia's thoughts, "of organizing a small celebration for New Horizons' 5th anniversary, something intimate but special." Sylvia smiled. William's genuine interest in the publishing house, which had grown to become one of the most respected in contemporary literature, was one of the many bridges that had been built between them. "That would be wonderful," she replied. "Ethan is especially proud of the last 3 authors we've discovered. We could do something in the garden of the house with some readings." New Horizons had exceeded all expectations. What had begun as a modest project, born from Ethan's personal crisis, had become a leading publishing house, known for giving a voice to unknown talents and for its commitment to social issues. The latest book they had published, a story about the experience of immigrants in Europe, was being considered for a prestigious literary award. Sophia ran back towards them, her cheeks flushed from exercise. "Look what I found," she exclaimed, showing a small stone with sparkling veins. "It's beautiful, sweetie," Clara said, examining the treasure with appropriate solemnity. "It looks like quartz. I'll save it for Dad," Sophia decided. "He collects my special stones." The girl's devotion to her father was evident in every word, every gesture. Ethan had become the kind of father William never was: present, attentive, capable of balancing his professional responsibilities with his family role. "Speaking of your dad," Sylvia said, checking her watch, "we should head back. He promised to be home early today." The return to the spacious apartment they had bought 2 years earlier, in a quiet but central neighborhood, was marked by Sophia's animated conversation, recounting in great detail every discovery of her afternoon in the park. Upon entering, they found Ethan and Vera engrossed in an intense conversation in the living room, surrounded by papers scattered on the coffee table. "Dad!" Sophia exclaimed, throwing herself into Ethan's arms, who received her with a wide smile, lifting her into the air. "My little explorer, how was the park?" While Sophia recounted her adventures again, now with additional embellishments, Sylvia approached Vera. "Progress with the project?" she asked quietly. Vera nodded, showing her a dossier full of photographs and documents. "We've located 10 more people who could benefit from the program. Stories similar to yours, Sylvia. Talented people trapped in impossible situations." The project they were referring to was the New Horizons Foundation, a non-profit organization they had created the previous year. Using part of the publishing house's profits, the foundation provided housing, training, and job opportunities to homeless people with artistic or literary potential. It had been Sylvia's idea, inspired by her own experience, and it had quickly become a fundamental part of their shared mission. Vera, with her experience in social work, had joined as program director. "You should see some of the texts we've received," Vera continued enthusiastically. "There's a woman, Teresa, who writes poetry that would take your breath away. She had been living in a shelter for 2 years after losing everything in the economic crisis." Sylvia smiled, feeling that familiar lump of emotion in her throat. Every success story, Every person who found a path to hope through their foundation was a validation of her own transformation, of the second chance life had given her. Dinner passed in an atmosphere of family warmth that, even after 5 years, still surprised Sylvia. Clara and William exchanged anecdotes about their youth. Vera passionately discussed the Foundation's next charity event with Ethan, and Sophia, at the center of it all, radiated contagious joy. Later, when the guests had left and Sophia was asleep, Ethan found Sylvia on the terrace, contemplating the lights of New York with a thoughtful expression. "A penny for your thoughts," he said, offering her a glass of wine. Sylvia smiled, accepting both the glass and his company. "I was thinking about time, how 5 years can change everything." Ethan nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. "From a vagrant to a publishing director and respected philanthropist," he joked gently. "Quite an impressive turn. From a con artist to an honest woman," she corrected with a smile that still contained traces of vulnerability. That was the truly impressive turn. They remained silent for a few moments, contemplating the urban horizon. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I received an interesting call today, from a film producer." Sylvia looked at him, surprised. "About what?" "They want to adapt Shadows of Yesterday for the big screen. They think it's a perfect story for these times. Redemption. Second chances. The true nature of success." Shadows of Yesterday had been the publishing house's first success. The novel written by that former university professor Sylvia had met during her days on the street. "That's wonderful," she exclaimed. "Robert will be ecstatic." "There's more," Ethan continued, an enigmatic sparkle in his eyes. "They want to base a second project on another inspiring story they've recently come across. The story of a woman who went from living on the streets to creating a successful publishing house and a foundation that's changing lives." Sylvia looked at him incredulously. "No, they can't be referring to you, to us, to our story." "But I'm no heroine," she protested. "My past is full of lies, of deceptions, and of survival," he added softly, "of resilience, of the human capacity to change, to redeem oneself." He took her hands in his, looking at her intensely. "Your story, Sylvia, could give hope to people who feel they have no way out. It could show that even from the darkest place, it's possible to find light." Sylvia felt tears forming in her eyes. "You haven't told them the whole truth. I've told them the essential. The rest, well, the rest is between us." The idea of exposing her life, her transformation to public scrutiny, was terrifying. But there was also something liberating in the possibility that her experience could serve as a beacon for others. "I need to think about it," she finally said. "It's not just my story. It's yours too, Sophia's." Ethan nodded understandingly. "Of course. There's no rush." He leaned in to kiss her, a kiss that contained all their shared history, all the difficulties overcome, all the love that had grown between them, despite, or perhaps thanks to, the obstacles. 5 years, Sylvia murmured against his lips. "Who would have imagined that rainy night would bring us here?" What neither of them could know then was that the story they were considering sharing with the world, the story they thought they knew completely, still held one last secret to reveal. A secret that would change their understanding of destiny and of the invisible forces that sometimes guide human lives toward seemingly fortuitous encounters that turn out to be part of a larger plan. The celebration of New Horizons' 5th anniversary had become the literary event of the year in New York. The spacious garden of the countryside house that William had made available for the occasion was elegantly decorated with lights hanging from the trees and a small stage where selected authors read fragments of their works. Sylvia, radiant in a blue dress that enhanced the green of her eyes, moved among the guests with a natural confidence that, 5 years ago, would have seemed impossible. Editors, writers, literary critics, all wanted to exchange a few words with the woman who had revolutionized the American publishing scene with her innovative vision. "It's incredible," Marcus commented, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. "No one would believe that this sophisticated woman and this successful publishing house started with a casual encounter in the rain just 6 years ago." Ethan smiled, accepting the glass. Life has a pretty twisted sense of humor. He proudly watched Sylvia, who was now animatedly conversing with a renowned literary critic. Her transformation went far beyond the superficial. She had found her true voice, her authentic self, through a tortuous but necessary path. "By the way," Marcus continued, "your father seems to be enjoying himself immensely. I've never seen him so relaxed." Ethan followed his friend's gaze to where William, looking healthy despite his age and previous health problems, was chatting with a group of young writers. Beside him, Clara smiled, occasionally adding comments that made the group laugh. "He's a different person," Ethan agreed. "I think the stroke was, in a sense, a blessing in disguise. It made him reevaluate his priorities." The relationship between father and son had transformed deeply in recent years. The coldness and rigid expectations had given way to mutual respect and genuine affection. William had found in Ethan not the successor he had always desired for his business empire, but an upright man with his own path. "Dad!" Sophia's voice interrupted his thoughts. The girl, dressed in an adorable yellow dress, was pulling the hand of an older woman Ethan didn't immediately recognize. "This lady says she knows you," Sophia announced with the frankness of childhood. "She says she helped Mom and you a long time ago." Ethan looked more closely at the woman. She must have been about 70, with a kind face marked by the wrinkles of an intense life. There was something vaguely familiar about her, but he couldn't place her. "Excuse me," he said politely, "but I'm not sure." "I didn't expect you to remember me, Mr. Reed," the woman replied with a warm smile. "It was a long time ago, and we only met once, briefly." She continued, "I'm Lucy Miller. I worked at the coffee shop near the abandoned building where Sylvia used to take shelter, where you two met." The memory hit Ethan like a sudden wave. The rainy night, the hot coffee he had bought for a soaked stranger, the look of distrust in Layla's eyes. Sylvia, the beginning of everything. "Of course," he said, shaking her hand with enthusiasm. "You made me the coffee to go. I remember you asked me if I was sure I wanted 2 coffees at that time of night." The woman nodded, pleased. "Almost 6 years, and you remember that detail. Impressive. Have you met any of our author's family members?" Marcus asked, clearly confused by the exchange. "Not exactly," Lucy replied with an enigmatic smile. "Let's just say I played a small part in the story that you're celebrating today." Before they could continue the conversation, Sylvia approached, noticing the group that had formed around her daughter. "Sophia, I told you not to bother the guests." She stopped abruptly, immediate recognition in her eyes. "Lucy, is that you?" The older woman smiled broadly. "The same. It's a pleasure to see you again, Sylvia. Or should I say, Mrs. Reed." The 2 women hugged with genuine affection, leaving Ethan momentarily confused. "You know each other well?" he asked. Lucy was much more than just the lady at the coffee shop, Sylvia explained, emotion evident in her voice. "For months before we met, she saved leftover food for me at the end of the day. Sometimes she let me stay the night in the back room when it was too cold. She treated me like a person when everyone else just saw a vagrant." Lucy made a gesture dismissing the gratitude. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," Sylvia contradicted firmly. "Not anyone. Very few, in fact." Something in Lucy's gaze, a mix of wisdom and mischief, caught Ethan's attention. What brings you here, Lucy? How did you know about the celebration? Oh, I received an invitation, she replied casually, pulling an elegant envelope from her purse. It was quite unexpected, but I couldn't miss the opportunity to see what that story that began on a rainy night has become. Ethan and Sylvia exchanged confused glances. I didn't send that invitation, Sylvia said. Me neither, Ethan added, though I'm enormously glad you're here. Lucy smiled, as if holding a delicious secret. Perhaps it was fate then, or someone who knows the role I played in your story. Sylvia's curiosity was fully awake now. What do you mean by the role you played? We saw each other many times at the coffee shop, it's true, but… but there's something I never told you, Lucy interrupted, her eyes sparkling mischievously. About that particular night. She turned to Ethan. Do you remember exactly what I said when you asked for 2 coffees to go, Mr. Reed? Ethan tried to recall precisely. The night had been such a significant turning point in his life that many details remained vivid in his memory. You asked me if I was sure I wanted 2 coffees at that hour, that they would keep me awake all night, he recalled. And then you added something else. Something about… He stopped, frowning in concentration. About the cold and the rain, Lucy completed. I told you, terrible night to be on the street, especially for those who have no other choice. And then, as I handed you the coffees, I added, there's a young woman in the doorway of the abandoned building, 2 blocks from here. She seems to need help, though she'll probably refuse any offer. The memory hit Ethan hard. It was true. Those seemingly casual words had planted the seed that led him to deviate from his usual path, to find her in that doorway. It wasn't a coincidence, Sylvia whispered, understanding the implication. You directed Ethan towards me that night. Lucy had a satisfied smile on her face. I had been watching you for months, dear. I saw your intelligence, your dignity despite the circumstances. And I had also been seeing this young executive for some time, always polite, leaving generous tips, but with a sadness in his eyes that didn't fit with his expensive suit and status. She paused, her eyes moving between them both. That night, something told me you two should meet. An intuition, you could say. Or perhaps something more. Ethan and Sylvia looked at each other, a new understanding blossoming between them. Their encounter, which they had always attributed to chance, to a coincidence in the rain, had been subtly orchestrated. But it might not have worked, Ethan argued. I could have ignored your suggestion, taken another path. Or I could have rejected him, Sylvia added. In fact, I almost did. Lucy shrugged. Fate proposes, but you dispose. I just opened a door. You decided to walk through it. Marcus, who had been listening to the conversation with increasing fascination, raised his glass. To Lucy, then, the secret architect of this story. To Lucy, Ethan and Sylvia agreed, raising their glasses as well. As the celebration continued around them, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the implications of that revelation. So many crucial moments in his life had seemed to be due to chance. The encounter with Sylvia, the storm that forced them to take shelter together the night they first kissed, even Vera's appearance, just as they were beginning to build something stable. How much of it had really been coincidence, and how much was part of a larger design, imperceptible at the time, but clear in retrospect. What are you thinking about? Sylvia asked, noticing his pensive expression. Destiny, he replied honestly. Whether it really exists, whether our lives follow a predetermined path, or whether we create our own future with every decision. Sylvia followed his gaze to Sophia, who was now happily dancing with William, the stern patriarch transformed into an indulgent grandfather. I think it's a combination, she finally said. The universe places the pieces, but we are the ones who decide what to do with them. Ethan nodded, finding resonance in that idea. He remembered all the crucial decisions he had made. Stopping that rainy night, offering help to a stranger, leaving the family business, accepting the truth about Sylvia's past, forgiving his father, building something new from the rubble of what he once thought important. Each decision could have been different. Each crossroads could have led to a different destiny. "I'm happy with the pieces I got," he finally said, pulling Sylvia close. "And with the decisions we made." Sylvia rested her head on his shoulder, contemplating the scene in front of them. Sophia, Clara, William, Vera, all the authors whose lives had changed thanks to New Horizons, even Lucy, whose small act of intervention had unleashed this whole story. "Me too," she whispered. "Every step, even the painful ones, has brought us exactly where we were meant to be." And as the sun began to set over that celebration of second chances and new beginnings, both felt the certainty that, no matter what challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, not as the millionaire and the vagrant, labels that had lost all meaning, but as two people who had learned, through love and adversity, that true wealth is found in authenticity, in the courage to be true to oneself and to others. 5 years later, the conference room at the St. Regis Hotel in New York was packed. Journalists, literary critics, cultural figures, and literature fans had gathered for the most anticipated launch of the year, Intertwined Destinies, the joint autobiography of Ethan and Sylvia Reed, published by New Horizons on its 10th anniversary. In the front row, a smiling 11-year-old Sophia proudly held a copy of the book. Beside her, William, now a man with completely white hair but lively eyes, maintained an upright posture despite his cane. Clara, Vera, Marcus, and other familiar faces completed that front line of unconditional support. Ethan adjusted the microphone, exchanging a knowing glance with Sylvia, who was waiting for her turn to speak. After years of considering the idea, they had finally decided to share their story, not for fame or recognition, but because they had understood that their experience could serve as a beacon for others going through dark times. "Many of you think you know our story," Ethan began, his clear and confident voice resonating in the room. "You've read it in articles, you've heard it in interviews, the millionaire and the vagrant, the modern fairy tale, the CEO who gave up everything for love." He paused, his eyes scanning the audience. "But the true story, the one we've finally decided to share in these pages, is much more complex. It's a story about lost and found identities, about second, third, and even fourth chances, about the value of authenticity in a world obsessed with appearances." Sylvia took over, her presence at the podium exuding a serene confidence that only years of self-knowledge could provide. "When Ethan found me that rainy night, I was many people and no one at the same time," she said, her voice slightly tinged with emotion. "An expert liar, a desperate survivor, a dreamer who had lost her way. What I didn't know then was that that encounter, which seemed like just another opportunity for a scam, would become the catalyst for my true identity." For the next hour, they captivated the audience by recounting fragments of their shared journey. Sophia's birth, the creation of the publishing house, the foundation, the crises overcome, the painful revelations, the unexpected reconciliations. Without falling into sensationalism or self-pity, they painted an honest portrait of two imperfect human beings who had found in each other the strength to evolve. "This book," Ethan continued towards the end of the presentation, "is not just our story. It's a testament to the human capacity for change, for redemption, for reinvention, and above all, it's a thank you to all the people who were part of this journey, many of whom are here today." His gaze briefly rested on Lucy, now a 75-year-old woman smiling from the third row. The woman who had united their destinies with a seemingly casual gesture was still part of their lives, an honorary grandmother to Sophia and a beloved friend to them both. The title, Intertwined Destinies, was not chosen lightly, Sylvia explained. It reflects our conviction that human lives do not unfold in watertight compartments, but in a complex network of connections, some visible, others invisible, all significant. When it was time for questions, a young journalist raised his hand. After everything you've lived through, do you believe in destiny? Do you believe you were predestined to meet that night? Ethan and Sylvia exchanged a glance, communicating silently as only two people who have shared a decade of intense life can. We believe, Ethan finally replied, that the universe presents opportunities, doors that open momentarily, but we are the ones who decide whether to walk through them or stay where we are. That night, Sylvia added, we both made a decision that changed the course of our lives. I could have rejected his help, as I had done with so many others. He could have continued on his way, maintaining the safe distance that society establishes between an executive and a homeless person. The value of our story, she continued, does not lie in its exceptionality, but in its potential universality. We all face these crossroads, these moments when we must choose between the safe and the unknown, between the mask and authenticity. The rest of the session continued with questions about the foundation, which now helped hundreds of people each year rebuild their lives, and about the upcoming projects of the publishing house, which had expanded internationally. Later, during the private reception, William approached the couple, leaning slightly on his cane. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, with an emotion that the old William would never have shown publicly. "Of the family you've created, of the legacy you're building." Sophia, who had been circulating among the guests with the social ease of someone who has grown up surrounded by writers and artists, joined the conversation. "Grandpa, have you seen how many people came? Even that film director who wants to make a movie about Mom and Dad." William smiled, stroking his granddaughter's hair. "It doesn't surprise me. Some stories are too powerful to remain within the pages of a book." Later, when the last guests had left and the family was returning home, Ethan and Sylvia lingered behind, enjoying the New York night. 10 years, Sylvia murmured, intertwining her fingers with his. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday when we met, and other times I feel like I've lived 1,000 lives since then." Ethan nodded, understanding perfectly. "Every day with you has been a complete life," he replied, "with its joys, its challenges, its moments of growth." They stopped in front of a lighted fountain, the water dancing in hypnotic patterns. In the distance, they could see Sophia walking ahead with her grandparents, gesticulating animatedly as she recounted a story. "Do you know what I'm most grateful for?" Sylvia said, her voice soft but intense. "It's not the material comfort, nor the professional success, nor even social recognition. It's the luxury of simply being myself, without masks, without characters, without lies. Just Sylvia, with all her imperfections and contradictions." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, gazing into those green eyes that had captivated him from the very first moment. "And I'm grateful that you taught me to see beyond appearances," he replied, "to value authenticity over convenience, the real over the socially acceptable. You saved me as much as I saved you, Sylvia." The kiss they shared there under the New York stars contained a decade of shared history, moments of doubt and absolute certainty. Tears and laughter, overcome crises, and celebrated triumphs. And as they resumed their walk to catch up with their family, both felt once again that certainty that had guided their decisions over the years. That every step, even the painful ones, had led them exactly where they were meant to be, that their destinies, intertwined by chance, conscious decision, and perhaps something greater than themselves, had woven a story that transcended the simplistic labels with which the world had tried to define them. They were not the millionaire and the vagrant, nor the executive and the con artist, nor any of the other reductive categories they had faced. They were simply Ethan and Sylvia, two human beings who had found in each other the courage to be authentic, to grow, to turn obstacles into bridges towards a fuller and more meaningful life. And as the lights of New York shone around them, illuminating their shared path, both knew that, no matter what challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, with the same determination and the same love that had sustained them during these 10 extraordinary years. Because when two destinies intertwine with such depth and purpose, neither time, nor circumstances, nor the darkest secrets can truly separate them. They become, like them, witnesses and creators of a truth more powerful than any fiction. That authentic love, born of vulnerability and strengthened by trials, can transform not only two lives, but create ripples that touch and change countless others. And that, perhaps, was the most valuable lesson of their entire story. If you liked this video, please like, subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends, and leave us your opinion in the comments. Your support helps us continue creating more content like this. Don't forget to activate notifications to stay updated on our next exciting stories.